Hello, everybody, and welcome to second episode of Let's Talk Draft. Um, uh, a little off of Let's Talk Broncos, Let's Talk Draft. Frankie and I are going to be bringing this to you guys every Thursday for the rest of the year leading up until the main event, the draft. Who doesn't love the draft? Today, we are going to get into tackle prospects. Our first time really breaking down how these guys, like in specific prospects, right? We kind of talked a little bit about welcome to school episode was episode 1. Frankie and I are calling it episode 0. This is episode 1. So I'm excited to actually get into some of this draft stuff with you guys. But first off, Frankie, how are you doing, man?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm hyped to get into it. I'm hyped everybody's, here. It's hopefully been a good holiday for everybody. And, it's draft season. It's time. We're going to be ranking out some of the best tackles we're looking at. And I think Denver might be able to come away with one in the first round if they really want to. So I'm excited to look into it.
Totally. So, yeah. And by the way, guys, happy Thanksgiving to you all of our Let's Talk Broncos listeners, all of our new Let's Talk Draft listeners. Have a happy Thanksgiving. Frankie and I are recording this the day before. We don't want to record on Thanksgiving, but
I couldn't convince the girl. I couldn't do it. She'll be mad.
Yeah, you can't. How are you supposed to record coming off the turkey coma?
Exactly.
Yeah, you can't do it.
You hate turkey, Joey. Your Thanksgiving takes are horrible. Thanksgiving takes are horrible.
Turkey is not that great for the people listening. You make it once a year. I don't know what, like, the hype's crazy. Everything else you make more than once, but we wait a whole 365 for the turkey. Doesn't make sense, doesn't add up. But let's get actually into the episode here. So getting into the offensive tackles for Frankie, first I want to ask you, we're ranking, or not just ranking, we're talking about 5 guys today. And they're all kind of at the top of the class. We haven't gone too detailed into the bottom guys or the mid-round guys. We're talking about the top. And I want to ask you, how does the top of the tackle class look to you right now?
I think it looks pretty good. I don't think you necessarily have a guy that's going to be super elite and is going to end up being like a top 5 pick, but I think it's going to be full of guys that can be serviceable and might end up developing into a lot of quality starters in the NFL. You got a lot of super good athletes that I think are going to just, grow, and if they get into the right situation in a couple of years, they could be something really special.
Totally. And an array of different types, right? And we're going to get more into this, but I'm just sitting here looking at the names right now and the different archetypes. Like, I think that a lot of teams tackle 1 could be another team's tackle 5. That's how this class kind of stacks up to me. You have all different flavors of, like, guys you want, guys that fit specific schemes better than others. So that's something that is, like, really interesting to me. I always like this because the debate for tackle 1 is going to be really exciting this year. I like going back and forth with people, and you're really going to see what people value, I think, this year in their tackles. Do you agree?
Yeah, definitely. No, there's a lot of athletic freaks that are going to fit a lot better into doing a lot of zone blocking, and then there's just a lot of maulers, man. It's like you said, there's definitely an array of talents that teams are going to have different prospects at the top of their board. And especially for a team like Denver, where we don't necessarily know what the coaching staff is going to look like, it's interesting to see, because some of the guys that we might look at as the best tackle in the class could honestly slip down to a position like 20 through 25 where Denver might end up picking.
Totally. And that's a great point, Frankie. I think we're going to rank these guys at the end, so make sure you're waiting till the end. That's something to look forward to. But coach and scheme could completely change our lists, I think. I think knowing what the Broncos scheme would be like, okay, maybe the guy I like the most generally isn't my number 1 tackle for the Broncos. So that's something that interests. But Frankie, I first want to ask you about a kid from Northwestern. We're going to hop straight into prospects here. Peter Skoronski, right? Stepping in for Rashawn Slater. Rashawn Slater, obviously, of the Chargers now, and he's been terrific. I was a big fan of Rashawn Slater. I wanted him on the Broncos desperately. But Peter Skoronski, how does he fit? How has he slid in for Rashawn Slater since he left? Do you like him? I just looking for your overall thoughts.
So I love Peter Skoronski. It's kind of interesting how he's like, the replacement for Rashawn Slater, because that's pretty much the exact kind of comparison you're going to get. He's a very short arm tackle, and people are going to absolutely hate that. There's going to be a ton of people that want to move him to guard, just like Slater. And I think he's just, he's a technician. He's got a really solid base and a really powerful lower half where he can just, like, it doesn't matter. He's got 32-inch arms, which is going to scare off a lot of teams, but his ability to kind of absorb a lot of the issues with that. And when you watch the tape, it's really not something he struggles with when he goes up against the teams like Ohio State or Wisconsin, who have a couple of the longer athletes at the edge position along the defensive line. Like, you don't really see him to struggle too much. And I mean, he is just so athletic and quick in his vertical sets and his pass sets that, like, I think he's going to end up being like one of my favorite tackles in this class. And the best part about him, or not the best part, but like for a team like Denver, where they just need help along the offensive line, is you can just test him out at tackle. And if it doesn't work, I think he's going to be an incredible guard. I mean, and there's nothing wrong with getting just a great piece along that offensive line, you know?
1000%, Frankie. And I'm going to kind of pick your brain here a little bit before I give my opinions. Because I think you really studied these guys, maybe even a little more than me. I really think that your takes have been really solid. We've been DMing back and forth. For Peter Skoronski here, do you envision, with all the freaks in the NFL, the long arm guys, I mean, if we're talking about the edge position in the NFL, pound for pound, that might be the freakiest of any position, I think. Mm-hmm. Do you think that those short arms, because, I mean, it's without doubt, a lot of GMs will mark you off the draft board without it. How much of an impact do you think a leap for that, like the leap to the NFL, how much of an impact do you think that has?
So I guess, I mean, you can't really say until you see it, honestly. I don't think it's going to be too big of a problem based on what I've seen on the tape so far. But again, you know, when you're coming from the Big Ten to go into the NFL, it is a massive jump, like you're saying. But I mean, I think the ability is there. And when you just see like the foot speed combined with the power he's got to, you know, just set a solid anchor when guys might get into his chest, I think is good enough that I don't see a massive problem with it. I think, you know, a lot of people had the same questions about Slater, and we saw him become one of the better tackles very early on. So I'm not overly concerned about it. Obviously, it kind of depends on how he tests. You know, if he ends up looking pretty good in a lot of the later season games, you know, that might end up changing some things. But I mean, so far, I think he's been about as like on the field technically sound as you can like out of a guy. You know, he's just been really good for Northwestern on an offense that really hasn't been good either. I think that's a critical thing to point out as well, is he's one of the, you know, he's the Bugatti in the trashy garage meme, where he's just 1000%. He's doing his job while the rest of it is falling apart a little bit.
Yeah, and it, like, I think so. For those who don't know, Peter Skoronski was recruited by really, really good schools. I don't have the list in front of me of who, but it was really good schools. The reason he ended up going to Northwestern was because they were the team willing to give him a chance at tackle. And obviously his paid off, right? He's going to be one of the top 5 tackles taken this year. I say that pretty confidently, without doubt. Do you agree with that? Or am I off?
No, 100%. I guess it kind of depends upon how a lot of these guys close out, but based on the senior year tape, I don't see how a lot of these other guys are going to surpass him unless the length really is just something teams are just like, no, we don't want you. And again, like, I just think if you're willing to play him at guard, he's going to be a juicy guard. So I don't think he ends up going after 5 tackles go.
Okay, for sure. So we're on the same page there. One thing, so I think I'm a little lower on him than you. I will say that. And like I said, we'll stay towards the end because we are going to give our rankings there. But exactly. But I think I worried about his length. Every once in a while, I do see him leaning to compensate for it. And I see on occasion some of these power rushers really get into his chest pretty good. His anchor is amazing. Like, for how good, or for like the players he's matching up against, it's so impressive seeing him just be able to sit down on these guys and stand still. And it really, really negates like what you would like think the arm length would, like the negatives that would cause, right? Mm-hmm. So I think the way he's able to sit down on players is amazing. I just worry about, like, the question I asked you, Frankie, how does it look at the next level? And I think that's something a lot of people are going to ask. But the best point I think you made was out of all these 5 guys we're about to talk to, he has the highest ceiling, just because I know I can move him into guard. I know I can do that. I don't have a worry about him there, I don't think. I think if you were to play a zone blocking scheme, because he isn't the most powerful, but his foot speed is really good. He's able to reach his landmarks really good. Mm-hmm. He does a lot of stuff like that. I think he's a really solid guard.
No, yeah, he's a prospect I really like a lot. And I think, I mean, it might just be because, you know, obviously we're Broncos fans, that he's just a prospect I see that if he's to slip, he's going to be able to play really well right away, I think. And I think worst case scenario, you move him around a little bit and you have him figure it out somewhere else. But it's just kind of, the athleticism I think he's going to get. I think he's going to be one of those tackles that just has an insane 3-cone too, because I mean, the way you see him move, and I forget who put out the stat where it's just like one of those guys who just ends up in like those 90th percentile. They just most of the time end up being very solid starters in the NFL. And I think he's one of those guys.
For sure. I totally agree with you on that one. Do you also agree that like zone block scheme is probably the best for him?
Oh yeah. 100%.
Zone.
No, yeah. He's 6'4", 315. And I mean, he moves really well. I mean, I think the best thing you can have him do is just kind of double stack up and kind of hope to get upfield and try to seal off a second level guy. And he's just really good at that. He plays angles really well. I think that's kind of the best spot to have him.
For sure. I think if you are a Rashawn Slater believer, you'll like Peter Skoronski a little bit. I think that's my take. He has shorter arms than Peter Skoronski shorter arms than Rashawn Slater from what I've heard. Mm-hmm. But that hasn't been confirmed yet. It's just from what I've heard. So that's something to watch out for. But another player, and I started off the podcast with this, that I think people are going to be all over the place on because of that length. But anyways, Frankie, are you ready to move on to the next one?
Yeah.
All right, perfect. Let's get into Paris Johnson Jr. from Ohio State. When I look at the mock drafts, when I look at the consensus like players, I think I see Paris Johnson Jr. ranked the highest, most consistently out of anybody on this list. So I think it would be really good to get your opinion on him. Do you like him as much as the others?
Yeah, I think Paris Johnson's kind of one of those clean prospects where you look at him and you just kind of see his body type, you see the way he plays, and you see it transitioning really well to the NFL level. I mean, he's got prototypical length, I'd say. He's like 6'6", so he's got the size, and he beats people up off the line of scrimmage. He's pretty good. I don't think he's given up a sack this year. And I mean, when you play for Ohio State, you're going to kind of get a little bit of a bump just because people are going to see you play a lot and you do go up against the decent competition. I'm excited to see how he looks in like the college football playoff. And, if he gets to go up against guys like Will Anderson or, whoever he's going to go to face, he'll get to face some NFL competition. That'll be pretty cool. But he's got a good bit.
Yeah, I really liked Paris Johnson Jr. Specifically out of the fact I don't think we're seeing his best football yet. I'll be honest, guys. I'm talking about a football player that has all the tools. He's big. He's athletic. He can reach, like, not just athletic. He's really athletic for his size, I think. He's smooth is the way I would describe him, like maybe a term I would throw out there. Mm-hmm. He reaches his landmarks really, really well. And when I say landmarks, by the way, Frankie and I have been talking about this. We're going to get some clips together so you guys know exactly what we're talking about in the future. When I'm talking about landmarks, though, like going out to get a linebacker that some can't, you know what I mean? He's able to go reach that guy, whereas one of these lumbering more tackles is going to have a harder time. Paris Johnson gets there with pretty good ease. I think sometimes he gets over aggressive on it and his angles can be a little sketchy, but overall the ability is really good. I think he has the highest ceiling of anybody in this draft class, offensive tackle wise, that I've seen so far. And I'm just really impressed. Playing for a big school, he's played some level of competition. I think I can't wait for the college football playoffs, just like you, because I do want to see some of these more elite ones, like the Will Andersons, like you said, the Georgia guys, like that would be fun. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of different matchups that I think is really going to be telling on just how far away he is, I guess, in his evaluation, or how close he is to reaching his potential, or not just reaching his potential, but being a guy that can step in and be productive right away. I don't know. I really like Paris Johnson, Frankie.
Yeah, I think he's just such a good run mover, or a mover in the run game. And, he's a guy I like a lot. He's been doing a lot of good things at a very good school and asked to do a lot of, things we're going to see at the pro level. Smooth mover for his size, like you're saying. And yeah, he's a guy that, the draft boards are going to really like. So it'll be interesting to see how long he kind of maintains. Like you're saying, it feels like he's kind of that OT1, just like for the, just the general consensus right now. But I think that's also just a lot of because he's playing for such a big school and a lot of people can get the opportunity to see him every week. So it'll be interesting to see how long he maintains that, because I think, like you're saying, he has all the tools and he's a great ball of clay for someone to get to mold into just an incredible tackle. Right. But I don't necessarily know if he's there yet as much as some of these other guys right away. But
so what are the big negatives you have on him, if you have any?
I don't necessarily love I don't love how much he uses his hands. Like he has a lot of length, but sometimes he just gets a little bit inside and he lets people get inside to his chest too much. And I don't know. He for being so big, he doesn't always play with the best pad level and lets guys kind of knock him back a little bit, just sometimes. But I think that just kind of comes with being so like dominant most of the time that it's almost like I don't think necessarily all the time. I don't want to say he's not like trying too hard, but I don't think necessarily he has to try too hard all the time. And then sometimes he just gets beat a little bit on some lazy reps. But again, I don't think he's a bad prospect if you put him in the right hands, right?
No, 1000%. I think that if you have a good offensive line coach and you feel comfortable with that offensive line coach and say, hey, we are giving you this freak of an athlete that has all the tools to be one of the best tackles in football. Because I think Paris Johnson does have those tools to become that. I really do. When I watch him, you would draft him if you feel like you could, like you have the pieces in place to develop a guy like this. Yeah. So that's kind of our thoughts on Paris Johnson. I kind of agree with you in the negatives. I will say for being such a huge guy, I don't think he's the most powerful, right? You would like to see it more. Just like, I don't know, more sitting people down, right? Pushing people out of their gap, mauling guys. I don't really think that's his game. He has a chippiness to him where he'll block through the whistle, but the power isn't always there. Did you pick that up as well?
No, I completely felt that. Like kind of exactly like you're saying. He just doesn't always play as much to his size as I think you want. And I think a decent part of that might also just be because he plays across from an absolute mammoth of a tackle. So sometimes you just kind of see the difference in a little bit of aggression on that front. And I think that might also play into a little bit. But I mean, yeah, like it's not like there's anything like, I don't know. I didn't see anything that was necessarily like a consistent glaring issue that would have it to the point where it's like, oh, this guy like needs to drop. Like I think he still will be a very high tackle taken. I don't know. He didn't necessarily offer me the kind of idea that this guy's going to come in and be like a Tristan Wirfs level of like he's going to shut it down. Not that a lot of people come into that level, but I don't think he's necessarily going to come in and be like a shutdown tackle right away. I think he will need a little bit of time, almost like an Andrew Thomas type.
I agree with you. And then I just have one last question for you on him. Do you have a preferred like fit or scheme that you'd like to see him in?
Yeah, I think he'd probably work well in zone blocking as well. I think that's probably my favorite to see him in. I think he kind of matches almost like you'd want to see him doing almost the type of stuff that you have like a Trent Williams type doing. Obviously not to say he's going to be something like that, but someone who can just be a big movie for you guy. Almost something like a Dwayne Brown is being used like on the Jets. Just, someone to be able to clear out guys in space that can just get downfield.
Cool. So sounds like you're a pretty big Paris Johnson fan. I don't know how the Skoronski Paris Johnson thing is going to match up. I'm excited to see.
Yeah.
But it sounds like our first two, you're both a pretty big fan of. Not over the moon, I won't say, but you're a pretty big fan of. So moving on to our next one, I know you've been hyping this guy up all over the timeline, as have I. I really like this player. Let's move on to Darnell Wright from Tennessee. This Tennessee offense, of course, has really shocked some people this last year. They got knocked off the last game. But Tennessee, overall, really, really great year for them. They have a lot of offensive pieces that have exploded this year, and I think Darnell Wright is in that conversation. What are your thoughts on him?
The massive improvement we've seen out of Darnell Wright this year has just been awesome. And like, he's been such a big part of that offense exploding this year. Sadly, Hendon Hooker got hurt, but like just the things like he's just sick. He's just such a strong prospect. He absolutely mauls people. He shoves people down in the run game. He's got some really fun moves that he uses in the pass pro. And he's just so strong. Like he's just an absolute brick wall of a prospect. Like, I love Darnell Wright. I don't know necessarily. He's a little bit clunky in his game. There's not necessarily like he's kind of the mover you'd expect. I believe he's like 6'6", 335. And like
6'6", 335.
He's a big body and he plays like it, but like he does the job well. He's a right tackle. I don't know if he's played any snaps at any of the other positions, but I know he's played right tackle this year only. And like
he played
that seems like where I'd want to keep him.
He's played a little guard as well. I think he's played a little guard. I think he has experience on both sides on guard. And then now he's playing tackle for them. If I'm not mistaken, I'm going to have to go. I wrote about this in my article, how stupid I am. But I know that he has experience in that across that offensive line. Do you think could work at guard though?
No, 100%. I've seen that mentioned a couple times on Twitter, honestly, too. And that might be something that ends up happening. Like I said, he is a little bit clunky and he does struggle a little bit with those extra like fast and bendy guys. I do wonder how he'll kind of deal with that though. like one of the most impressive things for me about Darnell Wright is that he's going up against such good competition. Obviously, he's playing in the SEC, and I mean, he went up against Alabama this year, and he had a great game against Alabama. Obviously, you know, that Tennessee offense did awesome things against Alabama's defense, and that's not a thing you often can say against the Nick Saban defense. And like, he's just had so many games this season where, like, one of the things I always like to look for in a prospect is like, he's a guy that when he's playing lesser opponents, you see him really impose his will on these guys. Like I think about the Kentucky game where, like, not to try to, you know, nothing against Kentucky, but like when he goes up against some smaller, like, edge players, sometimes he's really just able to throw some guys around, and it's really fun to see. And like, that's something you want out of a guy that's going to go into the league. I think he kind of plays with a little bit of that edge and a little bit of that, like, tenacity that, like, not too much. Like, I don't think he's a guy that's going to get in trouble at all, but like the type of stuff you want to see from a guy who you hope can become like a first round prospect or a second round prospect. You know, like, I think he'll come in and be an actually very impactful player, kind of just because you see him have the tools to deal with what he's doing. And I mean, he's so strong. Like, he's just so strong in the run game. I think he'll be a prospect that, like, you know, you'll take the bad reps. Sometimes he can be a little bit grabby when guys beat him around the corner, and he does have a couple holdings this season, but like, he's a guy that's going to keep your quarterback clean. And I like those guys a lot. And that's an important thing to have in this league when you have so many of these young guys that you want to keep safe. So I love Darnell Wright.
Right. And I think, so we were kind of complaining about Paris Johnson not always playing to his size, not the most powerful guy. He has reps where he kind of looks powerful, and then others where it's like, oh, where is it? Darnell Wright is not like that at all. When Darnell Wright wants to put you on your butt in the run game, he can do that in a lot of cases, especially when he's cracking down and down blocking. Man, when he hits these people, these defensive or these interior defensive linemen, it's like problems where you might move you completely out of the gap type stuff. That's what we're dealing with Darnell Wright. He is a people mover in the run game for sure. I think in pass pro, he's gotten better throughout the season from what I've seen, at least, right? I'm not going to say I have film on every single game of this year, but the 4 games I've watched, I watched them in order from beginning to end. I saw him get better. He has a lot of nuance to it. I do think he gets a little grabby at times, but when his hands lock into your pads,
it's over.
His hand grip is insane. He locks in and you're done. You might be finished right there. Yeah. It's hard to counter it. He's that strong. And I do have to say, for his size, because we're talking about a player that's listed at 6'6" and 335 pounds, he moves pretty good. Now, does he move like Peter Skoronski or Paris Johnson? No, not close. Those guys are freaks. Peter Skoronski being a little smaller, right? He's able to move really well. Paris Johnson just being a freak show athlete, able to move really well. Darnell Wright isn't to that level at all, but he moves well for his size generally. Do you kind of agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. No, I think a lot of the clunkiness more comes in like his pass sets, but I think he's definitely a great mover in the run game. I mean, you see him be able to get upfield and steal on linebackers really well. And I mean, he's able to get out in screens, and like, I can't say enough about Darnell Wright. I really like that prospect. One of my favorite things about him too is, I mean, like, he plays through the whistle. He really finishes blocks. I love that he traps dudes. He loves to lay on top of them and just kind of like, like it's great. Like, he's really a guy that just clearly enjoys playing the line so much. Not like, you know, any of these guys don't, but like, he's clearly a guy that just enjoys imposing his will on guys. And those are people you want on your offensive line. And I think that's something that, like, he brings almost a level of mentality that you want to have in that room. And I like Darnell Wright a lot. He's one of my favorite prospects in the draft.
Yeah, I agree. He's one of my guys early. I'm not going to do a my guys type list until I watch a lot more.
That'll be a later episode.
The later episode. Stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
Later episode for sure. But early on, Darnell Wright, I think I'm higher on than consensus. So I'm with you on that. I think you are also, with the way you've posted him. I think
I've been pretty shocked about how low he is, just because, like, I mean, the numbers he has, like, I think he's another guy that doesn't have any. So I'm looking at it right now. He has 6 pressures and 0 sacks on 391 pass block snaps. That's really good to do in the SEC. Like, if you do that, like, you deserve a good look, especially after you've already faced teams like the Georgias and the Alabamas. Like, all right, brother, you can we're going to give you a look. Like that's really incredible. And I mean, I'm pretty sure he's only 22 years old. Like he's awesome. And I really think, again, if a team needs a right tackle, like I know there's probably going to be a question of like, oh, like, can you move him to left tackle? Like most teams in the NFL need a solid right tackle. It's one of the positions that GMs are always saying that they need a better upgrade for.
All of them. Yeah.
It's like, you know, it's not a bad thing to have a solid right tackle. So if it's really like a question of like, oh, we already have this established right tackle, you know, can we take him? Maybe you look for another guy, but if your team needs a right tackle, he's gonna be a great pick. Or maybe another guy that you have to shift inside to guard. But I think you can keep another guy, or he's another guy that will be able to work it out at tackle.
For sure. And to that point, Frank, you made, I think it was Dane Brugler that said this, but as he's asking teams, hey, what are your positions of need? Like what kind of guys are you looking for? Where do you think you need to improve? 9 out of 10 teams are saying we would like more DB depth and we would like a right tackle. It's position. It's things
it's
that like
glaring hole. Like
it's glaring almost everywhere.
Right tackles in the league. There are not many.
No, there's not. And that's why I think this experience that Darnell Wright brings at right tackle, I'm not mad at it.
No.
The Broncos need a right tackle.
Broncos need a right tackle. Like, dude, and that's the thing too. And like, if there are teams that are like, we're not willing to take Darnell Wright in the top, you know, however many picks, like, let's get it going, George. Like, we can make this happen. Like, he's a guy that I think he will work better in like a gap power scheme. I don't necessarily know how like scheme versatile he is, but like, man, like he's kind of one of those guys that I think, like, I just like him so much. And the idea of having a Quinn Miners and Darnell right side of your line for the next however many years is very exciting to me. That's a very exciting idea in my mind. Like that's a right side of your offensive line that's going to kick some ass in the run game, and you're going to be able to pick up a few yards of pop on the right side. And you haven't been able to say that in Denver for a while. Sorry.
No, you're good. Like you start to develop personality is I think what you're getting at. Like your team could start to develop personality. Russ is like the best rush you get is a Russ with a run game. And I think Quinn Miners and Darnell Wright could bring that. Now, I asked you the same thing on both of this, and you kind of mentioned this in your last point, but is there a scheme that you like most for Darnell Wright?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely like, I think a gap power thing would definitely work best for him. Like you see him playing something like the Patriots or like the Ravens, he's going to be able to super hard push people off the snap and just, you know, do a lot of awesome things. But, you know, I don't necessarily want to take the opportunity away that like he couldn't work in something else. Like, I don't know. I don't think he's necessarily it's not like he's immobile. Like that's a big thing I want to highlight to people. You know, while there is a little bit of like, it's not like he's an immobile prospect. That's pretty much what I'll leave it at. So I think, you know, it's not like he's super limited to what you want to put him in, but I do think he'd be better.
1000%. And then let's get into our next tackle here. We already highlighted Paris Johnson from Ohio State, but they have another on the opposite side of the line, right? Two completely different type of players, so I'm excited to get your opinion on him. DeJuan Jones, Ohio State, one of the biggest people, probably the biggest pound-for-pound person that's going to come out of this NFL draft class. What are your thoughts on him?
Like you said, if you like Daniel Falele last year, you're gonna love DeJuan Jones. He's kind of like he's on, I don't want to say the upgrade, but he's massive. He's like 6'8". I've seen places listing him at 380 pounds. I've seen people listing him at 375 pounds. He's an absolute unit. He has, I believe it was an 89-inch wingspan. This guy was like, so before this year, he was considering playing, I believe, like, he was kind of weighing which sport he wanted to go into. At least I heard that when someone else was talking about him. And like, you know, he fully committed to football. And this year he's just been an absolute wrecking crew. He clearly is just so great. And like I said, he has an 89-inch wingspan. Guys, that's like an NBA wingspan. I believe that's like a wingspan of someone crazy. That I think it's like a 7'1" play or human. If you like were to do the math, like it is absurd. And when you talk about like the value of length in offensive tackles really can't be overstated. Like, the ability to just be like, oh, shut down. Like, you know, like that's something you need a lot of. And he has it for days. He's kind of another one of those prospects that you put him with he's an offensive line coach's dream, because if you can, you know, really get this guy to master some technique, he's going to be absolutely dangerous because he's just so big. He moves pretty well for that size, you know, like we're kind of going to say about a lot of these guys. And I mean, he's just an absolutely awesome prospect. He's again, like, I don't want to say the opposite of Paris Johnson, but they're very different prospects. And he is just a boulder.
He's a massive dude. He's a truck, right? Like this guy is huge. When I think about it, and Frankie, you're the one that told me this, but it seems like, oh, this guy should go to the Ravens, right? You saw Orlando Brown go down there, have some success. I think the Pats are another team that makes sense, right? Like these are teams that value the length that these offensive tackles bring, and they've had success with tackles like them in the past. I think Trent Brown, a guy I always noticed give Von Miller a little trouble with his length. No one gave Von Miller trouble, but out of the guys that gave him the hardest time, Trent Brown I thought was one of them. I'll ask you this, because I think you studied him a little more than me, honestly. I watched him, but I don't think I studied him as much as you. What do you think about his mobility? How much does that hamper him? Can he get to the second level? What is your opinion on that?
So I think he moves pretty well. Like it's adequate, I'd say. Like you're never gonna be like, oh wow, this guy's absolutely flying. But I think he moves well enough that like he's able to climb. Like we say, dude, when you have that long of arms, and again, he's very strong for his size. Like it's very good grip strength. You know, he's able to lock dudes up once he gets his hands on them. That like I'd say he climbs pretty well. You know, like he's an adequate mover, but I wouldn't call him like a superstar mover. I think he'll test okay, but like. It's really going to be the size that carries this guy. I don't remember how Falele tested last year, but I think from what I've read, he's supposed to maybe be a little bit more athletic than him. I think I'm kind of quoting like a Dane Brugler article or something.
Yeah,
yeah.
Interesting. No, that's good stuff to hear. When I watched him, I thought he was, out of everyone we've talked about so far, and it makes sense with how big this guy is, he's the clunkiest out of them. Now, with that, right, with the clunkiness, you always also get he is the most massive human being on earth. Those are the two sides of the coin, right? It depends on what you value there. If you really, really value that length and that size, you're going to love him. If you want a dynamic mover at tackle, I don't think he's the guy for you, as I would say the same thing about Falele. I'd say the same thing about Trent Brown. Like, these guys are huge, and they might move well for their size.
Exactly. And they're limited on where they can go.
Right. This is another one of those guys where I could see him way, way, way down some teams' list, because they're going to value zone blockers, right? They're going to value guys that can move, guys that can really move. Those type of guys are really going to like a Peter Skoronski maybe. Whereas DeJuan Jones could fall way down their board, right? Just not even like we're talking top 5. He could fall completely down. Whereas other teams, he could be in their top 2, top 3, right? If that's the thing you value. And that's what makes this tackle thing exciting. I mean, that's why I'm excited to even get more into this as more game film comes out and I'm able to debate people on the timeline. The people know I love doing that. So that'll be fun. But yeah, DeJuan Jones, any final parting thoughts on him?
No, not really. I'm excited to see, like, again, he's another guy that I'm excited to see to get to the CFP playoff, because playing in the Big Ten, he's just kind of one of the bigger human beings on the field, as we're kind of stating. And it'll be kind of exciting to see guys that are more just better equipped to kind of deal with that. Not that he hasn't faced, great competition so far, but just some more like elite competition. I'm excited to see him have to do that. So
yeah. Guy with maybe the longest wingspan ever coming from this position, DeJuan Jones.
No, I think that will be the thing. Is I think he'll be like one of the longest wingspans ever. So there you go.
I mean, that's a pretty crazy stat, right? This is a freak. Fun. This is a freak guy that was made in a lab. Like, you don't see guys walking around outside.
So he might end up having like the longest arms, and then if the Skoronski reports are true, he might end up having some of the shortest arms. So we will have the exact opposite end of the spectrums, pushing barriers. We're creating things here. The NFL draft, dreams come true. It's
1,000%. So let's move on to the next one here. Last guy out of our 5. What do you think about Georgia's Broderick Jones, who is also right there with Paris Johnson? I see a lot of the time. Maybe the second ranked, I would say, tackle for most. What are your thoughts on him?
So I didn't love Broderick Jones. Broderick Jones was a very I don't know. There was nothing on the tape that necessarily super hard flashed to me. I think a lot of these guys have a trait you can really bang home on to be like, this is kind of a guy we can, mold into a superstar. And that's not me trying to say Broderick Jones is bad. I think he's a pretty safe prospect, but I just don't necessarily see a guy that's like a guy you're going to be wanting to burn like a top 25 pick on necessarily. I don't know. I think he's not the biggest dude. I think that'll be kind of a thing. I don't know what his length seems fine, but I mean, he's not just like the biggest guy. So I think he's a little bit limited in schemes he can kind of go to. And honestly, from what I've been seeing, he's almost a guy I'd consider moving to guard a little bit. I don't love him too much as a run blocker on the outside, and I'd be curious to see if he'd just be a little bit better on the interior. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on Broderick?
So Broderick Jones, to me, I will also say, I think he has all the tools, but I don't think he has one dynamic tool. That's the way I would describe it. He's kind of a mix of a lot of these different type of players, and I think that's why the NFL likes him. From what I read, the NFL likes him a lot more than what I think you do, Frankie, and more than I do, if I'm being honest. The one thing so Broderick Jones I like. I will say that I like him. It's not like, it's Broderick Jones, go undraftable. You know what I mean? It's not like that. But the way Georgia, you mentioned this to me, the way Georgia rotates their offensive line sometimes makes it difficult. Could you expand on that real quick?
So Georgia, there was this quote from the summer, and they were doing it throughout their tape. Like they just kind of like switch between some of their best 5 starters sometimes, and sometimes like not like they're just trying to get a look at one of their younger offensive tackles, which is totally cool. But it's kind of like, man, you're taking Broderick Jones like this, you're taking him off the field, and like then he'll get put back on the field. It's very interesting. It's a weird situation they got going down. What's going on here, Kirby Smart? And but like, I don't know. Like again, there are just things about him I don't enjoy necessarily how he blocks downfield. There are going to be the highlight clips. He has a couple of these like massive downfield blocks where he blows up a DB that's like 150 pounds less than him, and that's cool. But it's like, I'd say his hit rate on like those second level blocks where he's actually able to like lock up and finish a defender is just not great. Like I don't know what it is. He blocks with his head down. He really just doesn't like connect on a lot of the blocks insane. I'd like to see him finish on. And I think that's kind of like, I don't know. I think that's obviously something that's pretty fixable, but it's something that frustrates me enough going in that like, again, I look at a lot of the other tackle prospects he's against, and I think that's kind of something that does it for me. Like, I just like some of these other guys that I think show a lot better potential and floor, honestly, if I'm being completely honest. Like, and that's not me trying to like, beat up on Broderick Jones. Again, I think he'll be totally fine. I think a lot of the tackles that come out of Georgia end up doing pretty well. They're just another offense that asks their tackles to do a lot of NFL caliber things. And it's just like, I don't know. I think he's a fine prospect, but I almost want to paint him like he was a bit of a boring prospect. But to be completely fair, a lot of times the boring prospects for me end up boring, like beating the shit out of me. One of my notes, this is going to sound terrible, on Patrick Surtain was sometimes it just seems like this is a bit of boring tape. Like that sounds dumb, but like sometimes it's just like, I don't know. I don't see the flashes of like, wow, that you necessarily want to see. You'd see it like a lot, but sometimes it just, I don't know. It wasn't flashy enough for me.
I want to talk about that blocking with his head down thing because it's true. When he gets downfield and he does the process great, like everything up into the point contact happens. He dips his head so much. It's a weird thing that I was taught out of because if you drop your head, we're talking concussions, we're talking neck injuries, stuff like that. Like when I played football, it was such a big thing, like play with your head up. Broderick Jones being younger than me now, like I'm sure he was taught the same thing. But it's annoying. And that is the reason why he misses these downfield blocks so often, is because right before the contact point, you're ducking your head. And I've heard offensive line coaches talk about it forever. You can't block what you can't see. Right. Yeah, it's as simple as that.
It costs a lot of and there's a lot of big plays for Georgia's offense out of their running backs this year. And it's like, I'm not trying to beat up on him, but they'd be a little bit bigger if he could just connect on some of these second level blocks. And it's it's easy to get hyped again on a lot of these, like, oh, like they're running a quick smoke screen for the receiver and he comes out and absolutely blindside destroys the however big corner out of whatever school in the SEC. But like, you know, that's cool, but he's not going to get to do that on a consistent basis at the NFL as much as he's going to need to climb on linebackers that are actively trying to beat you. And when you see a guy that like sees him coming head on, he puts himself at such a disadvantage so often that like, I don't know, man. I don't know. I did not fall in love with Broderick Jones like I have a lot of the other tackle prospects this year.
So one more question to you. Did anything stand out in pass pro to you? How good do you think he is in pass pro? We talked a lot about the run. I'm just curious about that one.
So, I mean, he's very clean. He hasn't given up a ton of pressures this year. He's just, I don't know. He's, again, I don't want to, he's very technical. He's pretty decent with his hands. He can get a little bit like grabby around the outside, but I mean, he's not crazy. Like, you're never going to be super blown away with his sets. Like, he just seems fine. You know, I wasn't super impressed in any regard, but I'd say like I didn't see anything that was like a glaring negative.
Interesting. Okay, so we went through our five. And Frankie, now I am going to ask you. I think I was mentioning it throughout this podcast. People have been waiting for this. I want to know your top five. Let's start off from best to last. Off of these five guys that we've talked about today.
Yeah. So we kind of actually went in exactly my order. So my order is Peter Skoronski, Paris Johnson Jr., Darnell Wright, DeJuan Jones, and Broderick Jones. Yeah. So we went exactly in my order. So if you want to know Frankie's order, go back, people, because you'll just hear it straight from top to bottom. That's exactly, we didn't plan this, but you know, sometimes
no, Frankie was I'll tell you exactly what happened.
Way to go.
It's because I'm correct. No, it was because Frankie sent in the tackles to Zach in order, and then Zach.
Am I playing behind the scenes?
He was making plays behind the scenes.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's get into it. So that's your top five: Peter Skoronski, Paris Johnson, Darnell Wright at 3, DeJuan Jones at 4, and Broderick Jones at 5.
There it is. That's the top 5 right there. Let's hear yours.
All right. My number 1 is Paris Johnson Jr. from Ohio State. I think the tools, the ceiling is the highest out of all of them, and I say that pretty confidently. If I'm talking about just guys that I think can be a franchise tackle, Paris Johnson shows me all the tools that I'd want to see from that. So that's why he's my number 1. I also think he has a pretty safe floor just knowing that he has those tools, right? I don't think he's like an extremely raw player right now. So he's going to be my number 1 because while I do think I have somewhat of a floor there, he also gives me the highest ceiling. My number 2 is going to be Darnell Wright. I think Darnell Wright gives me – I think I'm going to be honest, guys. This is going to end up being a hot take from everybody I hear.
Oh, I can't wait. Here we go.
I think he's the cleanest one. I think if I'm just talking about clean film that I enjoy, that I'm sitting there watching like, oh, that's a really good rep. And then I'm continuously going through like, oh, that's a really good rep. And I'm continuously going through. Darnell Wright gives me more like this is good than any other tackle on this list, in my opinion. So I'm going to give him number 2 just because he doesn't have that ceiling I think Paris Johnson has of reaching that potential. And, of course, I think my rankings are going to just go off of, hey, these guys get in the scheme fit that I think works best for them. This is how I'm ranking. So Darnell Wright gives me I think he's the cleanest. He's the person that I enjoyed watching the most. And I thought on a consistent basis, he performed the best. So I'm going to go 2, Paris Johnson.
I respect it. I love it.
Okay, perfect. 3rd is going to be Peter Skoronski. Or actually, no, let me flip. I wrote this down, but I've been having trouble with this one back and forth.
We have a last second switch, ladies and gentlemen. He's trying to up his poll suggestion.
No, I'm going Broderick Jones. I'm going Broderick Jones.
At 3.
I'm going Broderick Jones at 3. I think Broderick Jones is okay. First, I'm going to talk about Peter Skoronski and why I have him lower than Broderick Jones. This is how I'm going to do it. I value the length. Like, while I was a huge Rashawn Slater fan, a massive Rashawn Slater fan, I see too much of these people getting into Peter Skoronski's chest. And while he does his base, like in the way he's able to sit down on people, is really, really good, like really good, and it hasn't affected him too much in college whatsoever. I'm going to repeat what I said earlier. These NFL athletes are a little different.
You don't trust him against Max Crosby and like Joey Bosa and the Nick Bosa of the NFL.
I mean, like, do I trust Peter Skoronski against Khalil Mack's long arm in the NFL? Like, if we're talking peak Khalil Mack, I don't think so ever. Like, I just think there's going to be matchups that I don't like against Peter Skoronski, while there's others that I do. I just see the negatives with it, and it's like, I think Broderick Jones has a better chance of being more versatile, and I can block more types of edges. Like, I think that's why. While I like Peter Skoronski, if I'm talking specifically tackle, I'm not the one. Like, I don't have enough faith in it to say you're going to be good. I would try him at it if I drafted him, see if he succeeds, and he would play into guard for me.
Do you think he'll have a smooth transition to guard? Do you think he has what it takes to be able to play that position at a high level?
Yes, if we're talking about an outside zone scheme, I think that he could. But I'm ranking my tackles today, and I think I have more faith in Broderick Jones than I do Peter Skoronski at tackle. And then my last one here is going to be DeJuan Jones. While his arms, insane, right? They're crazy. Like, the physical stuff, he's a mountain of a human. Everything about that's amazing. I love it. I just don't like the clunkiness sometimes. That's what I don't like about it. He's another type of guy where it's like I can specifically see, like, oh, you're going to struggle against this type of player. And I don't want to see that. I am drafting for guys that I think can block almost everybody. I'm not going to say they're going to block everybody, but different archetypes of edges. And I don't think DeJuan Jones is going to be able to do that. I think he's very scheme specific. Him and Peter Skoronski are the most scheme specific on this list, I think, by far.
Definitely.
Yeah, DeJuan Jones being more of a gap power player, and then Peter Skoronski being more of, we need to run outside zone. If you switch that, they're not going to work. You're not going to find success. So I don't know. Maybe when I find out what the Broncos are running, like I said earlier, this whole list can change. But the way I'm setting it up now, the scheme versatility kind of matters in my brain.
No, definitely. I think that's a fair list. I think we've got some competitive lists. I did want to throw out a couple honorable mentions of just guys that I think could be in this top 5, but I haven't necessarily gotten to watch enough of, if that's fair. I don't know how you feel about that. But Olu Fashanu out of Penn State, another guy I know could probably crack a lot of people's top 5. I know a lot of people are in love with him. Another insane athlete. I've only gotten to see a couple of games of him, so I don't really want to put him up too high yet, whereas a lot of these other guys have gotten to see at least 4. Jalen Duncan's another guy I know a lot of people like, the Terrapins tackle. Right. And, those are the only 2 off the top of my head that I feel like should still get mentioned, that, like, if people see a top 5 and they're like, where are these guys? They were thought of. I haven't gotten to see them enough to, put them above these guys. So,
perfect. Well, cool, man. Anyways, that was fun. I liked talking.
Yeah.
I liked talking the list at the end. That was fun because we have different lists. Like, way different lists, matter of fact. I can't wait to see how people react to this. But, it is interesting. It's like I said at the beginning. I think people are going to be all over the place on this. I don't think there's a consensus anywhere. Like, I don't think that we don't have an Evan Neal in this class. I'll say that.
No, there's no one who's really solidified themselves yet at all. It's like they're the guy that needs to be that offensive tackle one right now. I completely agree with that.
For sure. So, Frankie, I'm going to sign us out here. Where can they find your amazing work, man?
Twitter at Frankie's Film. I have a TikTok, Frankie's Film NFL, that I've been putting stuff on a little bit. I go on Mile High Report. I have articles that I post over there weekly. I do a Broncos film review. And then over here every week, I do this draft podcast. And that's pretty fun as well.
Let's go. I think that was a good episode 1. I'll say again, last episode was episode 0. That was just like to introduce ourselves. This is episode 1. We're going to get better through this. I think we're going to have clips of players. I want people to know exactly what we're talking about. I think sometimes, not all the time, like, does the draft community explain what's going on that well. Everyone's a draft expert, right? Yep. I want to be able to show people exactly what we're talking about. So we're going to include clips on this podcast. It's going to be a ton of fun. But until next time, guys, follow me at JR Drafts. Make sure you're listening to Frankie and I's show every single Thursday leading up until the main event, draft time. It's going to get really interesting during this podcast. We're going to learn who the Broncos hire at head coach. We're going to be able to study that guy's scheme. We're going to get into more positions. We're going to be able to talk about
drafts. We're going to have
mock drafts. We're going to be able to talk about what the Broncos would do if they didn't trade for Russell Wilson.
Exactly.
Who they would like with that
we'll
pick.
Just be crying over here. Seahawks fans are going to laugh at us. Come leave comments about how much Russ sucks now, Seahawks fans. See if we care. I'm sad enough. I'm already getting bullied by Broncos fans now who think I hate that guy. No, his film is shit. So, you know, like. Oh.
Let's do it. All right.
Come watch our draft pod.
Yes, make sure you're following it. Shout out to Zach and Breed. Let's Talk Broncos podcast. We do that 5 times a week.
Yep.
Every day, but Sunday we have some show going, whether it be our draft podcast on Thursday or Let's Talk Broncos every other day. So make sure you're doing that. But until next time, let's go Broncos. NFL draft. We're looking